For centuries, one object was considered so sacred that touching it meant instant death. And yet, it vanished without a trace. Former slaves, fresh out of Egypt, with no workshops, no precision tools, and no industrial infrastructure of any kind, were ordered to build a portable object roughly 45 inches long, plated inside and out with pure gold, weighing close to 300 pounds, built to exact measurements, with 3 perfect structural layers and 0 room for error. A deviation of a few millimeters made the whole thing useless. A single direct touch meant instant death. So how did a group of former slaves pull off this level of engineering without a single modern workshop? Why couldn't anyone touch it? And why could only one man, once a year, get close to it, knowing he might not walk out alive? In this video, we'll reconstruct how it was built, how it was used, and why it was considered the most dangerous object ever carried by human beings, before it vanished completely. The biggest obstacle to building the Ark of the Covenant wasn't the materials or some lost technique. It was the situation itself. Israel had just walked out of Egypt after roughly 400 years of slavery. These were people trained to mass-produce mud bricks, not to execute fine precision work. There were no specialized workshops, no refined measuring tools, no infrastructure capable of supporting a project that demanded absolute exactness. Everything had to happen in the middle of the desert, with limited resources, under constant pressure from time and survival. The order didn't come from a human council or a craft tradition. The instructions were given to Moses on Mount Sinai, relayed with a level of detail almost unheard of in the ancient world. Measurements, materials, joints, procedures, none of it was a suggestion. These were rigid specs. Moses wasn't the builder, he was the link between the plan and the people who had to execute it, and that plan left 0 room to adapt to desert reality. The Ark allowed no improvisation. The dimensions were exact, roughly 45 inches long, 27 inches wide, and 27 inches tall. There was no margin for error. A deviation of just a few millimeters made the object invalid. Unlike other ancient construction projects, there was no fixing mistakes later. Every piece had to come out finished, final, functional the first time. This wasn't just about assembling a gold-covered wooden box, it was about executing a sequence of technical steps where a single failure could compromise the entire project. The problem wasn't just building something complex. It was building it under conditions that made the task humanly impossible for that specific group of people, at that specific moment in history. And it was exactly at that point, when the task looked impossible for any ordinary person, that one specific name entered the story. The solution to a problem that couldn't be solved through normal means didn't come from a workshop or a technical tradition built up over generations. It came from a very specific choice. The biblical text names a man called Bezalel, from the tribe of Judah, as the one directly responsible for building the ark, not as some symbolic supervisor, but as the actual hands-on technician running the project. And when you look closely at that choice, it completely breaks the pattern you'd expect for that moment in history. Bezalel wasn't a priest or a military leader. He was a craftsman, someone trained to work with his hands at a level of precision that would be rare even in a stable, settled society, let alone a nomadic camp in the middle of the desert. The record says he was filled with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge to work with gold, silver, bronze, wood, and stone, a combination of skills that would make him a master metalworker, carpenter, and finisher all at once. Alongside him, an assistant named Oholiab, from the tribe of Dan, rounded out the team, handling the most delicate parts of the work. This detail matters. Building the ark wasn't a group effort or something improvised on the fly. It was centralized in specific hands, with absolute control over measurements, joints, and finishing. That's exactly why the project allowed no corrections later, whoever built it had to get it right the first time. Every stage demanded advanced planning, technical mastery, and flawless execution, with no room for trial and error. But even with the right craftsmen in place, the challenge was far from solved, because skill alone doesn't create resources out of thin air. And that's exactly where the next obstacle showed up. Where would the materials for something that should never have existed in that environment actually come from? Even with the right craftsmen in charge, building the ark ran into an even more concrete problem: raw materials. This object required a concentration of resources that simply didn't exist in a nomadic camp in the Sinai desert. Large amounts of pure gold, sturdy wood, and extremely rare textiles weren't just lying around in that landscape. And yet the list of requirements was never scaled down or adjusted to local reality. The gold needed to be enough to completely cover the structure, inside and out, not just decorative sheets, but a continuous, flawless layer applied over solid wood. Modern estimates based on the ark's dimensions and the minimum viable thickness of the coating put the total well over 200 pounds. For a people who had just been freed from slavery, that kind of volume was only possible for one specific reason: the plunder they brought out of Egypt. Before the escape, the Israelites received gold, silver, and fine fabrics from Egyptians desperate to appease the terror caused by the plagues. What looked like excess at the time became, in the desert, the only viable source of raw material. The wood requirement wasn't ordinary either. Acacia, one of the few species able to survive in the Sinai, has high density, natural resistance to pests, and low warping under temperature changes. It was heavy, hard to work, and extremely durable, exactly the kind of material needed for something meant to be carried around for decades. On top of that, fabrics like fine linen, and blue, purple, and crimson thread rounded out the list, materials whose value in the ancient world rivaled gold itself. All of it had to be gathered, prepared, and used without waste, because there was no way to get more. And that's the point where the challenge stopped being logistical and became mathematical. With the materials gathered, the challenge entered its most critical phase, turning raw resources into an object that allowed for zero correction. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't described in symbolic terms, it was described in exact numbers. Its length was to be roughly 45 inches, its width and height each about 27 inches. These weren't approximate or suggested values. They were rigid specifications. Even a tiny deviation made the object unfit for its purpose. To hit that level of precision without modern instruments, ancient techniques had to be applied with extreme care. Ropes with knots tied at regular intervals worked as flexible rulers. Simple plumb lines made from stone weights guaranteed vertical alignment. Cutting the wood required careful planning in advance, because there was no room for trial runs. Every acacia board had to come out ready, with correct joints, on the very first attempt. Once the wooden frame was assembled came the most delicate stage, plating it in pure gold. Unlike metal alloys, pure gold is soft and highly malleable, but it also deforms easily. It had to be hammered down to a thickness thin enough to bond to the wood, yet sturdy enough not to tear during application or transport. The coating couldn't have a single flaw, any exposed patch of wood compromised the object's integrity. Gold was applied both inside and out, creating a layered structure that dramatically increased the ark's total weight. Modern estimates suggest the finished piece easily exceeded what 2 average people could carry. On top of that, a gold molding was added around the upper rim, not as decoration, but as structural reinforcement, protecting the edges during constant movement. Every construction choice followed a functional logic. Nothing there was superfluous, and nothing could be adjusted afterward. And it's exactly this combination of layers, materials, and precision that led some researchers to suspect the Ark was hiding something beyond carpentry and metalwork. When the Ark of the Covenant is looked at purely as a religious object, a lot of its details seem excessive, almost over-engineered. But once its construction is analyzed through a physical, functional lens, those excesses stop looking symbolic and start looking unsettling. The Ark wasn't just a gold-covered wooden box built out of aesthetic devotion. It followed an extremely specific configuration: pure gold on the outside, acacia wood at the core, and pure gold again on the inside. That combination doesn't show up randomly in ancient objects. Technically, it matches the basic architecture of a conductor-insulator-conductor system. Gold is one of the best-known electrical conductors. Dry wood, especially acacia, acts as a natural, stable insulator. In arid environments like the Sinai Desert, static electricity builds up easily, especially on metal surfaces exposed to constant friction, frequent movement, and extreme temperature swings. If the ark was being carried repeatedly under those conditions, it wouldn't be far-fetched to assume a gradual buildup of electrical charge. In that scenario, the inner and outer gold layers would function as conductive surfaces, while the wood would prevent that energy from dissipating immediately. The most sensitive point in this structure was the lid, the mercy seat. On top of it sat two solid gold cherubim, cast from a single piece, with wings raised and facing each other. In modern engineering, raised metal points are known to concentrate and direct electrical discharge. In simple terms, they act as release points for built-up energy. That's led some contemporary researchers to cautiously raise an uncomfortable hypothesis: the ark may have behaved like a primitive form of energy storage and sudden discharge. This reading doesn't replace the biblical account, it adds weight to it. It helps explain why direct contact was fatal, why transporting it required strict isolation using carrying poles, and why rules that looked purely ritualistic produced immediate physical consequences. This wasn't just symbolic disobedience, it was real interaction with something that couldn't be treated as ordinary. Even so, even this rigorous physical structure doesn't explain everything. The ark wasn't only dangerous because of what it was on the outside, it was also dangerous because of what it carried inside. And that's exactly where its purpose stops being purely technical and touches something far deeper. Once the structure was finished, the Ark of the Covenant still wasn't complete. Its role didn't depend only on what it was on the outside, but on what it held inside. Unlike ordinary ceremonial containers, the Ark wasn't built to hold random objects. It was designed to carry specific items, each one carrying its own historical weight and symbolic significance. The first was the tablets of the law, not the original tablets Moses smashed coming down from Sinai, but the second set, rewritten after the incident with the golden calf. These tablets represented the legal core of the nation, a code that governed social life, worship, and authority. Keeping them inside the ark meant keeping the legal foundation of Israel protected, inaccessible, and centralized. The second object was Aaron's staff, originally just a plain wooden rod. It had been used in a public test to settle who actually held priestly legitimacy. Out of 12 staffs, only Aaron's bloomed, producing buds, blossoms, and ripe fruit in a single night. Keeping it inside the ark turned that event into permanent, undeniable proof of recognized authority. The third item was manna, the food that had sustained Israel in the desert. Unlike ordinary manna, which rotted if stored, the portion kept in the ark stayed preserved. It functioned as a physical record of continuous provision, something that couldn't be artificially reproduced. Together, these three objects created a single set: law, authority, and provision. The ark didn't just contain them, it unified them at one physical point. And from the moment this set began to be transported, every movement carried real risk and immediate consequences. From the moment the ark started being moved, it stopped being a stored object and became a standing risk. Transporting it followed strict rules. It couldn't be touched, carried just any way, or moved by just anyone. Only certain Levites were authorized, and only after strict purification. The method was unique: wooden poles slotted through side rings, keeping the ark suspended and isolated from human contact. These rules weren't symbolic. When ignored, the consequences were immediate. The best-known case is Uzzah, who touched the ark trying to steady it during an improper transport on a cart. The contact lasted a split second. The result was instant death. No warning, no exception. The failure wasn't in his intention, it was in breaking protocol. In military contexts, the ark acted as a decisive psychological factor. It wasn't carried into the front line as a weapon, but positioned visibly behind the army, boosting Israelite morale while rattling the enemies. At Jericho, it was carried around the city for 7 days, with priests blowing trumpets. On the seventh day, after 7 full laps, the walls collapsed, and fell outward, an unusual pattern for ancient sieges. But the ark didn't guarantee automatic victory. When Israel used it as a lucky charm without following the rules attached to it, disaster followed, in a battle against the Philistines, the ark was captured and thousands of soldiers died. The object was still powerful, it just didn't work outside the conditions it was bound by. Every use of the ark reinforced the same reality: it couldn't be treated as ordinary. And the single most dangerous moment of all didn't happen in battle, it happened in total silence, once a year. None of the ark's uses was as restricted and risky as the annual ritual on the Day of Atonement, the only moment it was approached directly, in the most isolated space in the entire religious system, the Holy of Holies. Only one person on earth was authorized to enter, and only once a year. The high priest didn't arrive there by chance. Days beforehand, he separated himself from ordinary life, repeated washings, partial fasting, strict purification. On the day itself, he wore plain linen with no metal ornamentation, gold wasn't allowed in that space. Before entering, he sacrificed for his own sins, because any personal failure put the entire ritual at risk. The most critical part was the incense. Not symbolic, protective. Entering, the priest had to build a thick cloud of smoke completely covering the mercy seat. Tradition holds this barrier prevented direct exposure to the divine presence tied to the Arkansas. Entering without enough incense meant instant death. Only then could he return with the sacrificial blood and sprinkle it on the ark's lid an exact number of times. The whole process took minutes. No witnesses, no outside help. If something went wrong, no one was coming in to retrieve the body. This ritual repeated for centuries, until, at some point, it simply stopped. And when the temple was invaded, the space where the ark should have been was empty. In 586 BC, Jerusalem fell to Babylon. Solomon's temple was burned, looted, and torn down to its foundations. Babylonian records precisely list what was taken as spoils: gold cups, utensils, candlesticks, sacred furniture. But there's a glaring absence: the ark never appears in a single inventory. When soldiers entered the Holy of Holies, it was empty. No sign of destruction, no melted gold, no record of capture. It had simply vanished before the invasion ever happened. That opened the door to three theories. 1. It was destroyed, but there's zero documented evidence. 2. Priests hid it in chambers beneath the Temple Mount, areas that exist but remain inaccessible today for political and religious reasons. 3. It left Israel entirely, possibly for Ethiopia, where local tradition claims it's still kept, far beyond any independent verification. None of these has ever been proven. What we know is that from that moment, the ark disappears completely from recorded history. Maybe the biggest mystery isn't where it ended up, but what would happen if someone found it today. Here's the thing to sit with. The ark wasn't dangerous because it held some uncontrolled power, it was dangerous because it operated within limits that allowed no negotiation. Every measurement, every material, every rule made one thing obvious: there are realities human beings don't control, only respect. Honor those limits, and the ark meant protection. Ignore them, and the consequences were immediate and irreversible. Same object, completely different outcomes. Maybe that's exactly why it disappeared, not because it was lost, but because it couldn't keep existing in hands that no longer respected its limits. Today, the real mystery isn't where the ark is. It's what would happen if it were found in a world that turns everything into an object, an experiment, something to control. Maybe the silence around it has always been its last form of protection. If this raised new questions for you, drop them in the comments. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who want to understand the Bible beyond the surface. Subscribe for more like this. See you in the next one.